The stagecoach lurched to a violent halt, throwing Willa Richardson against the wooden door so hard her teeth rattled, and when she finally stumbled out onto the dusty street of Monticello, Utah in September of 1884, the world tilted sideways and refused to straighten itself no matter how many times she blinked. 3 days and nights of traveling from Boston had stripped away every ounce of composure she had carefully cultivated during her 22 years of life, and now as her worn boots touched Western soil for the first time, she felt her entire body begin to shake uncontrollably. The trembling started in her hands and spread upward through her arms, into her chest, until even her jaw quivered despite the warmth of the late afternoon sun beating down on her traveling dress. She had corresponded with Owen Crawford for 6 months through carefully written letters that painted him as a gentleman rancher seeking a refined wife to help civilize his corner of the Utah Territory. His penmanship had been neat, his words thoughtful, and his description of himself as a 30-year-old cattleman with land and prospects had seemed like salvation when her father's debts had forced her to leave everything she had ever known. But standing here now in this strange frontier town with its wooden buildings and red dust coating everything, Willa felt the full weight of what she had done crash over her like a wave. She was 1,000 miles from home, about to marry a man she had never met, in a place so foreign it might as well have been another country entirely. Her legs buckled without warning, and she grabbed for the side of the stagecoach but missed. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she thought distantly that she should probably try to catch herself. But her arms would not obey the commands her brain was sending. Then strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt, steadying her with a grip that was firm but somehow gentle at the same time. "Easy now," a deep voice said near her ear. "I have got you." Willa tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering too violently to form words. The shaking had intensified until her entire body felt like it was vibrating apart, and she could not seem to draw a full breath no matter how hard she tried. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, and somewhere in the rational part of her mind that was still functioning, she recognized that something was very wrong with her. The man supporting her weight called out to someone, his voice carrying authority despite not being raised to a shout. "Henry, grab her trunk from up top, and someone find Doc Morrison." "Right away, Owen," another voice responded, and through her blurred vision Willa realized with a jolt that the man holding her must be her intended husband. This was not how she had imagined their first meeting. She had pictured herself stepping gracefully from the coach, her traveling dress brushed clean, her hair neatly pinned, greeting him with the poise her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Instead, she was collapsing in the street like a fainting damsel from a cheap novel, unable to control her own limbs. Owen Crawford guided her away from the stagecoach toward the wooden sidewalk that fronted the buildings lining the main street. She caught a confused impression of curious faces peering out from doorways and windows, drawn by the commotion. Her mortification would have been complete if she had possessed the presence of mind to feel it properly. But the trembling had stolen her ability to focus on anything beyond the physical sensations overwhelming her body. "Can you walk?" Owen asked, and Willa managed a jerky nod even though she was not sure it was true. He kept one arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight as he guided her up 2 steps and through a doorway into what appeared to be a general store. The dimmer interior was a relief after the harsh sunlight, and the smell of flour and coffee and leather goods was oddly comforting in its normalcy. "Martha, I need a chair and some water," Owen called out, and a plump woman with gray, streaked hair bustled out from behind the counter, her expression transforming from curiosity to concern when she saw Willa's condition. "Oh, you poor dear," Martha said, already dragging a wooden chair across the floor. "Set her down here, Owen." "What happened?" "I am not sure," Owen admitted as he carefully lowered Willa into the chair. "She stepped off the stage and just started shaking." The woman disappeared and returned moments later with a tin cup of water, which she pressed into Willa's trembling hands. The cup rattled against her teeth when she tried to drink, water sloshing over the rim and down the front of her dress. She wanted to cry from the sheer frustration of not being able to perform even this simple task, but crying seemed like it would require more control than she currently possessed. Martha gently took the cup back and held it to Willa's lips, helping her take small sips. The cool water felt good going down her throat, but it did nothing to stop the violent trembling that had taken over her body. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps now, and the edges of her vision were going gray. "She cannot catch her breath properly?" Martha said, worry threading through her voice. "Owen, she is turning pale." Owen dropped to one knee in front of the chair, bringing himself to eye level with Willa. His face came into focus for the first time, and even through her distress she registered that he was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of whiskey that were currently filled with concern. This was the man who had written those careful, thoughtful letters. This was the stranger she had traveled across the country to marry. "Look at me," he said, his voice calm and steady despite the urgency of the situation. "What is your name?" "Willa," she managed to stammer out between chattering teeth. "Willa R. Richardson." "All right, Willa. I am Owen Crawford. I know this is not how we plan to meet, but right now I need you to listen to my voice and focus on what I am saying. Can you do that?" She gave a tiny nod, fixing her eyes on his face because it seemed like the only solid thing in a world that would not stop spinning. "Good," Owen said. "You are safe. You are in Monticello, Utah, and nothing here is going to hurt you. Do you understand?" Another small nod, though she was not entirely sure she believed him. Everything felt dangerous and wrong and terrifying, and her body clearly agreed because the shaking was not slowing down at all. Owen turned his head slightly, speaking to Martha without taking his eyes off Willa. "Do you have any blankets in the store?" "Of course," Martha said, already moving. "I will get one from the shelf." "She is in shock," Owen said, as much to himself as to anyone else. The journey must have been harder than she expected. "You are in shock," he said gently, making it a statement rather than an accusation. "Your body has been through something difficult, and it needs time to settle. Just breathe, Willa. Focus on taking slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you try that for me?" She attempted to follow his instructions, but her breathing was still coming in those short, panicked gasps that were not bringing in enough air. Her chest felt tight, and the gray edges of her vision were creeping inward. Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and placed one of his hands over hers where she gripped the blanket. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked with his body for a living. "You are not going to faint, and you are not going to die," he said with such certainty that some part of her actually believed him. "Your body is just trying to process everything that has happened. Keep your eyes on me and breathe. Just breathe." The door to the general store banged open and a thin man with spectacles and a black medical bag hurried in, followed by the younger man who must have been Henry. "Owen, Martha said you needed me," the doctor said, his sharp eyes already assessing Willa's condition. "What have we got here?" "This is Willa Richardson, the woman I have been corresponding with from Boston," Owen explained, straightening but keeping his hand over Willa's. "She got off the stage less than 10 minutes ago and started shaking like this. She cannot seem to catch her breath properly." Dr. Morrison set his bag down on the counter and approached carefully, his manner calm and professional. "Miss Richardson, I am Dr. Morrison. May I examine you?" Willa managed another small nod, still focused on Owen's face as he had instructed. The doctor pulled up another chair and sat down beside her, his fingers finding her wrist to check her pulse. "Racing heart," he murmured. "Rapid, shallow breathing. Trembling. Cold extremities despite the warm weather." He looked up at Owen. "You are right. She is in shock. The question is what brought it on." Miss Richardson, were you injured during your journey? Did something frighten you? And no, Willa forced out. Just tired. So tired. And then everything started shaking and I could not make it stop. 3 days on the stagecoach from where? The doctor asked. Salt Lake City, Willa said. Before that, the train from Boston. 10 days total. Dr. Morrison exchanged a look with Owen. 10 days of hard travel with probably very little proper food or rest. Arriving in a completely unfamiliar place to meet a man she has never seen before. It is no wonder her body decided it had had enough. This is nervous exhaustion combined with shock. What do we do for it? Owen asked, his jaw tight with concern. Warmth, rest, quiet, and time, the doctor said. Keep her warm with the blanket. Get some hot tea or broth into her if you can. Talk to her calmly and reassure her that she is safe. The shaking will pass once her body realizes it is no longer in danger. Then she needs to sleep for about 12 hours, I would wager. I can take her to the ranch, Owen said, but the doctor shook his head. That is an hour's ride in a wagon over rough terrain. In her current state, I do not think that is wise. Is there somewhere here in town she could rest for a few hours until she stabilizes? Martha spoke up immediately. We have the room above the store. It is not fancy, but there is a proper bed and it is quiet. She can stay there as long as she needs. I could not impose, Willa whispered, even though the idea of climbing back into any kind of moving vehicle made her want to cry. Nonsense, Martha said briskly. It is no imposition at all. Henry, go upstairs and make sure the room is aired out and the bed is made up. Owen, you stay with her and keep her talking. Distraction will help. Everyone moved into action except for Owen, who pulled his chair closer to Willa's and settled into it, still keeping one hand over hers. The warmth of his palm was seeping through the cold that had invaded her bones, and she held onto that sensation like an anchor. Tell me about Boston, Owen said conversationally, as though they were having tea in a parlor rather than dealing with her falling apart in a general store. What did you do there? I taught, Willa said, focusing on his question because it gave her something to think about besides the trembling. Piano and voice to young ladies from good families. Before my father passed. When did he pass? Owen's voice was gentle, understanding. April, Willa said, and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time. And then the debts came. So many debts. The bank was going to take our house. My aunt said I could live with her, but she made it clear I would be a burden. So when I saw your advertisement, you decided to take a chance on the frontier, Owen finished. That took courage. It took desperation, Willa corrected, then immediately regretted her honesty. This man was supposed to be her husband in just a few days, and here she was admitting that she had chosen him only because she had no other options. But Owen did not look offended. Instead, something that might have been sympathy flickered across his face. Desperation is honest, he said, and honesty is a good foundation for a marriage, even if it is not a romantic one. I was desperate too in my own way. A ranch is hard work for one person, and this town is not exactly full of unmarried women. I could have traveled to Salt Lake City to find a wife, but I did not want someone who would expect city life. I needed someone who could adapt to this place. I am not sure I am adapting very well, Willa said with a shaky laugh that sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. I have been here less than 20 minutes and I am already falling apart. You have been traveling for 10 days to a place you have never been to marry a man you have never met, Owen pointed out reasonably. I would be more concerned if you were not rattled by that. The fact that you got on that train in the first place tells me you are stronger than you think. His words settled something inside her chest. Just a little. The trembling was still there, but it felt fractionally less violent than it had a few minutes ago. She was able to draw a slightly deeper breath, and the gray edges of her vision had retreated somewhat. "That is better," Owen said, noticing the change. "You are doing fine, Willa. Just keep breathing." Henry clattered back down the stairs from the room above. "All set, Mr. Crawford. The room is ready whenever Miss Richardson feels able to go up." "Give her a few more minutes," Owen said. "No need to rush." Martha appeared with a steaming mug that smelled of chamomile and honey. "This should help settle your nerves, dear." Small sips. This time when Willa brought the cup to her lips, her hands were steady enough that she could drink without assistance, though the blanket around her shoulders still trembled with the aftershocks of whatever had taken hold of her body. The hot tea slid down her throat and pooled warmth in her stomach, and she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Better?" Owen asked, watching her carefully. "A little," Willa admitted. The worst of the shaking was passing now, leaving her feeling wrung out and exhausted but more in control of her own limbs. "I am so sorry. This was not how I wanted us to meet." "Life rarely goes according to plan," Owen said with a slight smile. "I think we are both learning that today. Do you think you can manage the stairs to the room? You can lean on me." Willa nodded and tried to stand, only to have her legs wobble alarmingly beneath her. Owen was there immediately, his arm around her waist again, taking most of her weight. With the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders and Owen's solid presence beside her, she managed to make it to the stairs at the back of the store. "One step at a time," Owen murmured as they began the climb. "That is all you have to manage. Just one step, then the next." It was good advice for more than just the stairs, Willa thought. One step, then the next. One moment, then the next. That was all she could handle right now. The future stretching out before her in this strange new place was too overwhelming to contemplate all at once. But she could manage one step at a time. The room above the store was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the main street of Monticello. Owen guided her to the bed and helped her sit down, then crouched to remove her dusty boots. "You do not have to do that," Willa protested weakly, but he was already unlacing the first one. "You cannot rest properly in these," he said practically. "And I suspect you are too tired to manage them yourself right now." He was right, of course. The simple act of climbing the stairs had exhausted what little energy she had left. When he had removed both boots and set them aside, she swung her legs up onto the bed and pulled the blanket more tightly around herself. Her eyes were already drifting closed. "I will be downstairs," Owen said quietly. "Martha will check on you in a bit. Rest as long as you need, Willa. Nothing else has to be decided today." "Thank you," she whispered, and then sleep pulled her under like a dark tide. When Willa woke, the light coming through the window had changed from the harsh brightness of afternoon to the gentler gold of early evening. For a confused moment she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten there, and then it all came rushing back. The stagecoach, the shaking, Owen's steady voice telling her to breathe. She sat up slowly, testing her body's responses, and was relieved to find that the violent trembling had passed. She felt wrung out and fragile, but she was no longer falling apart. Someone had brought her trunk up at some point while she slept, setting it at the foot of the bed. Willa stood on shaky legs and went to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the basin. She scrubbed her face and hands, finger-combed her hair as best she could, and changed from her travel-stained dress into a simpler day dress of dark blue calico. It felt good to be clean, to have shed at least the physical evidence of her difficult journey, even if the emotional toll was going to take longer to wash away. She descended the stairs carefully, one hand on the railing. The general store below was still open, with Martha measuring out flour for an older man in dusty work clothes. Owen was leaning against the counter near the front window, his hat pushed back on his head, talking with another man about cattle prices. He looked up when he heard her steps on the stairs and straightened immediately, concern flickering across his face. "You are awake," he said, crossing the store to meet her at the bottom of the stairs. "How are you feeling?" "Embarrassed," Willa admitted, "and tired still, but better. The shaking has stopped." "Good," Owen said. "That is good. Are you hungry? Martha has been keeping a plate warm for you in case you woke up." Now that he mentioned it, Willa realized she was starving. She could not remember the last proper meal she had eaten. The stagecoach stops had offered only hardtack and questionable stew, and her stomach had been too nervous to tolerate much even of that. "I am," she said. "Very hungry, actually." "Come on then," Owen said, gesturing toward the back of the store. "Martha has a kitchen through here. She and her husband live in the building attached to the store." He led her through a doorway into a cozy kitchen where Martha was already pulling a covered plate from the warming shelf of her stove. "There you are, dear," she said with a warm smile. "You have better color now. That sleep did you good. Sit down and eat." The plate held roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread with butter. Willa sat at the small kitchen table and ate slowly, trying not to shovel the food into her mouth despite how hungry she was. Owen sat across from her with a cup of coffee, watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "I really am sorry about this afternoon," Willa said between bites. "I have never had that happen before. It was like my body just decided to stop working properly." "Dr. Morrison said it was shock combined with exhaustion," Owen said. "You had been traveling hard for 10 days, and then you arrived somewhere completely unfamiliar. Your body reached its limit." "I am not usually so fragile," Willa said, needing him to understand that. "In Boston I taught 6 days a week, sometimes 8 or 10 hours a day. I kept house for my father after my mother died. I have 300 acres about an hour north of town, along the creek that feeds down from the mountains. Good grazing land, reliable water. I have built up my herd to about 200 head of cattle over the past 5 years. I also keep horses, chickens, a milk cow, and a vegetable garden, though I will admit the garden has not been doing as well as it could. I am better with animals than plants." "What made you come to Utah?" Willa asked, curious despite herself. "I grew up in Kansas," Owen said. "My father had a farm there, but when he died he left it to my older brother. I could have stayed on as hired help, but I wanted something of my own. I heard the land here was good and cheap if you were willing to work it, so I came out in 1879 with everything I owned in a wagon. Staked my claim, filed the paperwork, and started building. That must have been hard," Willa said. "Starting with nothing." "It was," Owen agreed. "The first winter I lived in a dugout built into the side of a hill because I had not finished the cabin yet. I ate a lot of rabbit and cornmeal, but each year it got a little easier. The cabin is solid now, weatherproof. The herd is healthy. The land is producing. I have hired a few men who help with the work during busy seasons. It is a good life, even if it is not an easy one. And you want a wife because—" Willa let the question trail off, giving him space to answer honestly. Owen met her eyes directly. "Because I am 30 years old and I am tired of being alone," he said. "Because a ranch this size needs more than one person to run it properly. Because I want children someday, and a partner to share my life with. I know that is not very romantic, but it is the truth. I am not offering you an easy life, Willa. I am offering you an honest one." Something in his directness appealed to her. At least he was not pretending this was some grand romance when they both knew it was a practical arrangement born of necessity on both sides. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "I want you to know that I will work hard. I know how to cook and clean and manage a household. I can sew and do basic carpentry. I am willing to learn whatever else I need to know." I am sure you are, Owen said. But we do not have to figure everything out tonight. You are still recovering from your journey. We were planning to marry at the end of this week, but if you need more time to adjust, we can wait. No, Willa said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. I do not want to wait. I do not want to be in limbo, not knowing what comes next. If we are going to do this, let us do it. Owen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. The minister said he could perform the ceremony on Saturday afternoon. That gives you 3 days to rest and settle in. You can stay here in the room above the store until then. Martha has already said it is fine. I should pay her something, Willa said, but Owen shook his head. Already taken care of, he said. She is being more than compensated for her trouble. You just focus on getting your strength back. Willa finished the last of her meal and set down her fork, feeling more human than she had since leaving Boston. The food and sleep had done their work, and while she was still tired to her bones, she no longer felt like she was going to fly apart at any moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. In your letters, you were always very proper, very formal. But today, when I was falling apart, you were different. More. She searched for the right word. Immediate. Direct. Which one is the real you? Owen's mouth corked in something that was almost a smile. Both, he said. I am not much of a letter writer, if I am being honest. I had to think very carefully about every word, and I probably sounded stiff because of it. But in person, there is not time for that kind of thinking. You just react. I liked the way you reacted, Willa said quietly. When I could not breathe, you did not panic. You just told me what I needed to hear. My mother used to get spells like that sometimes, Owen said. Overwhelming moments where her body would just shut down. My father never knew what to do with it, but I learned that staying calm and giving her something to focus on helped. I am glad it worked for you too. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Willa felt something shift between them. This was still a man she barely knew, a stranger she was going to promise her life to in 3 days' time. But he was not a frightening stranger anymore. He was just Owen, a man who had caught her when she fell and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and told her to breathe. Over the next 3 days, Willa slowly acclimated to Monticello and its rhythms. The town was small, with a population of maybe 200 people, most of them farmers or ranchers who came in for supplies once or twice a week. There was the general store where she was staying, a blacksmith, a livery stable, a small hotel, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other businesses. The main street was unpaved red dirt that turned everything the color of rust, and the buildings were mostly wood frame construction, plain and functional rather than decorative. Martha took Willa under her wing, introducing her to the other women in town and helping her prepare for the wedding. There was no wedding dress to be had, but Martha and 2 other ladies helped Willa alter one of her nicer dresses from her trunk, adding lace to the collar and cuffs to make it more festive. They also helped her understand the realities of ranch life in this part of Utah, explaining the rhythm of the seasons, the challenges of the climate, and the isolation that came with living an hour from town. Owen came into town each day, ostensibly to buy supplies or conduct business, but Willa noticed that he always made time to sit with her for a while, usually in Martha's kitchen or on the bench outside the general store. They talked about practical matters mostly, what supplies she thought she would need at the ranch, what her duties would be, how the household would be managed. But they also talked about smaller things. Favorite books, childhood memories, opinions on everything from politics to pie recipes. Willa found herself increasingly comfortable in Owen's presence. He had a quiet steadiness that she appreciated, and a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes. He was not flowery or romantic in his speech, but he was thoughtful and considerate, always making sure she had what she needed and that she was genuinely all right with the arrangement they were making. On Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Owen took Willa for a walk to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible in their intensity. The air smelled of sage and dust and something wild that Willa could not name. "This is beautiful," she said, watching the colors shift and change across the vast expanse of sky. "Boston never looked like this." "The sky is bigger out here," Owen agreed. "More room for it to show off." "Are you having second thoughts?" "About tomorrow?" Willa considered the question honestly. "I am nervous, but not having second thoughts exactly. I know what I am choosing. A hard life in a strange place with a man I barely know. But also a chance to build something new, to have a home again, to matter to someone. That seems worth the risk." "It is a risk for both of us," Owen said. "I might be a terrible husband." "You might be," Willa agreed. "But somehow I do not think so. You caught me when I fell, Owen. That says something about your character." "It says I have decent reflexes," Owen said, but his tone was gentle, almost teasing. "It says you were there," Willa corrected. "When I needed someone, you were there. That matters more than you probably realize." Owen was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. "I will try to always be there," he said finally. "When you need someone. That is what marriage should be, I think. Being there for each other. Even when one of us is shaking and cannot breathe?" Willa asked, trying for lightness but hearing the vulnerability in her own voice. "Especially then," Owen said firmly. He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Willa, I know this is not a love match. I know we are both doing this for practical reasons. But I want you to know that I will treat you with respect and kindness. I will provide for you as best I can. And I will never make you feel foolish for being afraid or overwhelmed. We all have moments when we shake. There is no shame in it." Tears pricked Willa's eyes, but they were good tears this time, tears of relief and gratitude rather than fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." They walked back to town in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. More stars than Willa had ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Tomorrow she would marry this steady, quiet man and begin a new life in this harsh and beautiful place. She was still afraid, but the fear was manageable now, balanced by a growing sense of hope. The wedding took place on Saturday afternoon in the small church at the edge of Monticello, with about 30 people in attendance. Most were Owen's friends and neighbors, people who had known him for the 5 years he had been in the territory. They regarded Willa with friendly curiosity, these weather-beaten ranchers and their sturdy wives, their sun-browned children. Martha stood up with Willa as her witness, and Owen's ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Thomas, stood up with him. Willa wore her altered dress and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Martha had helped her gather that morning. Owen wore clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a string tie, his dark hair neatly combed back. He looked nervous, which Willa found oddly comforting. At least she was not the only one feeling the weight of what they were doing. The minister, Reverend Paulson, was a kind-faced man in his 50s who had come to Monticello 2 years earlier to serve the growing community. He kept the ceremony simple and brief, speaking about marriage as a partnership and a commitment, about facing life's challenges together. When he asked Owen if he would take Willa as his lawfully wedded wife, Owen's "I do" was quiet but firm. When he asked Willa the same question, she took a deep breath and said, "I do," with as much conviction as she could muster. They exchanged simple gold bands that Owen had purchased from the general store, the rings feeling strange and heavy on Willa's finger. Then Reverend Paulson pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen leaned in to give her a chaste kiss on the lips, his mouth warm and gentle against hers for just a moment before he pulled back. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford," the Reverend said with a smile, and the small congregation applauded. There was a reception of sorts in the church hall afterward, with cake and coffee and well wishes from people Willa did not know but who seemed genuinely happy for them. Several of the ranchers' wives invited her to visit once she was settled at Owen's place, and Willa tried to remember all their names and faces, knowing she would need these connections in the isolated life ahead. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Owen quietly told her it was time to leave if they were going to make it to the ranch before full dark. They said their goodbyes and thanked Martha profusely for all her help, then walked to where Owen had left his wagon in front of the livery stable. Her trunk was already loaded in the back, along with the supplies Owen had purchased over the past few days. Owen helped Willa up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled out of Monticello heading north, Willa looked back at the little town that had been her first introduction to the West. It was already fading into the gathering dusk, and she wondered when she would see it again. The road to Owen's ranch was rough and rutted, following the creek bed through increasingly wild country. The land here was a mix of high desert and mountain foothills, with scrubby pinyon pines and juniper trees dotting the red rock landscape. In the fading light, everything looked mysterious and slightly forbidding, so different from the green rolling hills of Massachusetts that Willa's heart contracted with homesickness. Owen must have sensed her mood because he started talking, pointing out landmarks as they passed. That tall rock formation there, we call it the Sentinel. It is a good way to orient yourself if you are ever out this direction. The creek we are following is called Hatch Creek, and it runs year-round, which is why this land is so valuable. Over that ridge to the east is where my nearest neighbor has his place, about 3 miles away. To the west, the land is still open range, though there is talk of more people filing claims in the next year or two. Do you see your neighbors often? Willa asked, trying to imagine the distances involved. Thomas lives in the bunkhouse on my property, so I see him daily, Owen said. The other ranchers, maybe once or twice a month unless there is a crisis. We help each other out when needed, but everyone is busy with their own places most of the time. Can be lonely, especially in winter. I want you to know that going in. I appreciate your honesty, Willa said. I would rather know what to expect than be surprised by it later. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough road. The stars were coming out in full force now, and the air was cooling rapidly with the setting of the sun. Willa pulled her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Are you cold? Owen asked immediately. There is a blanket under the seat. I am all right for now, Willa said, though she appreciated his attentiveness. How much farther? Another 20 minutes or so, Owen said. You will see the lights from the cabin soon. I left lamps burning so it would not be dark when we arrived. Sure enough, as they rounded a bend in the road, Willa caught sight of golden light glowing in the distance. As they drew closer, she could make out the shape of a good-sized cabin made of logs, with a stone chimney at one end and a covered porch across the front. There were several outbuildings nearby. A barn, what looked like a bunkhouse, a chicken coop, and some structures whose purpose she could not immediately identify. The creek ran close to the house, and she could hear the gentle sound of water moving over stones. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and set the brake. Welcome home, he said simply. Home. The word felt strange, applied to this unfamiliar place. But Willa supposed it was true now. This was her home, for better or worse. She climbed down from the wagon before Owen could come around to help her, wanting to approach the cabin on her own feet. The porch steps were solid under her boots, and the door opened smoothly on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-built. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. There was a wooden table with 4 chairs, a cook stove, shelves holding dishes and supplies, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and rag rugs on the plank floor. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "It is not fancy," Owen said from behind her, carrying her trunk. "But it is sound. The roof does not leak. The walls keep out the wind, and the fireplace draws well." "It is nice," Willa said, and meant it. The cabin had a solid, cared-for feel to it, the feeling of a place that had been built with attention and maintained with pride. "You have done well, Owen." He looked pleased by her assessment. "The bedroom is through here," he said, carrying her trunk to one of the side doors. "I have been sleeping in the smaller room, so this one is yours. Or ours. However you want to handle the sleeping arrangements." Willa felt her cheeks heat. They had not discussed this aspect of their marriage, both of them perhaps too shy to address it directly. "I think we should take things slowly," she said carefully. "If that is all right with you. I know you have certain expectations as a husband. But we have only just met, and I would like time to adjust before we—" "That is fine," Owen said quickly, his own face reddening slightly. "Take all the time you need, Willa. I am not going to force anything. When you are ready, you can let me know. Until then, I will keep to the smaller room." The relief Willa felt must have shown on her face because Owen gave her a small smile. "I told you I would treat you with respect," he said. "I meant it." "Thank you," Willa said softly. "I know this must be strange for you too." "It is," Owen admitted. "But we will figure it out. There is no rush." He set her trunk down at the foot of the bed and gestured around the room. "The washstand has fresh water. There are extra blankets in that chest if you get cold. The necessary is out back, about 50 feet from the cabin. I will show you in the daylight tomorrow. Is there anything you need tonight?" "No," Willa said. "I am just tired. It has been a very long day." "It has," Owen agreed. "I will let you get settled then. Good night, Willa. And welcome home." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Willa stood in the center of the small bedroom and tried to absorb the reality of her situation. She was married now to a man she had known for less than a week. This cabin in the middle of the Utah wilderness was her home. Her old life in Boston was gone, unreachable, finished. Everything familiar had been stripped away, and she was starting over from nothing. The panic that had gripped her when she first arrived in Monticello threatened to rise again. That overwhelming sense of being in the wrong place, of having made a terrible mistake. But then she remembered Owen's hands steadying her, the weight of the blanket around her shoulders, his calm voice telling her to breathe. She remembered the way he had caught her when she fell, the way he had stayed with her during the worst of her shock, patient and unhurried. She remembered his honesty about what this marriage was and was not, his willingness to give her time and space. She had chosen this, she reminded herself. She had chosen to take this risk, to come west and marry this stranger, to build a new life in this harsh place. And if she could survive the journey here, if she could survive that first terrible moment of shock and fear, then she could survive whatever came next. Willa washed her face and changed into her nightgown, then climbed into the narrow bed. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw and surprisingly comfortable, and the blankets smelled of sage and sunshine. Through the small window she could see the vast expanse of stars overhead, and she could hear the distant sound of the creek, the occasional low of cattle, the whisper of wind through the pines. It was so different from Boston, where the sounds of the city had been constant. Carriages on cobblestone streets, vendors calling their wares, the clang of the trolley car. Here the silence was immense, broken only by the natural sounds of the land. It should have been unsettling, but instead Willa found it oddly peaceful. There was space here to breathe, space to think, space to become someone new. She fell asleep thinking about Owen's steady brown eyes and the gentle way he had wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and she did not dream at all. Willa woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and gray pre-dawn light filtering through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings, and then memory flooded back. Utah, the ranch, her wedding day, Owen. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress and apron, braided her hair, and ventured out into the main room. Owen was already up, feeding wood into the cook stove. He had clearly been awake for some time, because he was dressed in work clothes and his hair was damp, as though he had already been outside to wash. "Morning," he said when he saw her. "I hope I did not wake you. I tried to be quiet." "You did not," Willa said. "What time is it?" "A bit past 5, Owen said. "I know that is early by city standards, but on a ranch you start with the sun. The animals do not care about sleeping in." "What needs to be done?" Willa asked, wanting to be useful. "I will handle the morning chores," Owen said. "You can start by making breakfast if you are comfortable with that stove. The supplies are on the shelves there. Eggs are in the basket by the door. Brought them in from the coop already. Bacon is in the cold box outside. I will be back in about an hour." He left before Willa could respond, pulling on his hat and heading out into the dawn. Through the window she watched him walk toward the barn, his stride long and purposeful. This was his routine, she realized. This was the life he had built for himself over the past 5 years, the rhythm of his days. And now she was part of it. Willa surveyed the cook stove and supplies, taking stock of what she had to work with. The stove was similar enough to the one she had used in Boston that she felt confident she could manage it. She built up the fire, found a cast iron skillet, and set about making breakfast. By the time Owen returned, the cabin smelled of coffee, bacon, and fresh biscuits. He stopped in the doorway and stared at the table she had set with plates and food, looking genuinely surprised. "You made biscuits," he said. "Is that all right?" Willa asked, suddenly uncertain. "I found flour and lard and baking powder in your supplies." "It is more than all right," Owen said, sitting down at the table. "I have been living on cornbread and hardtack for months. I cannot remember the last time someone made me proper biscuits." They ate in companionable silence, Owen working his way through 3 helpings of everything while Willa picked at her food, her appetite still not fully returned after the stress of the past week. But she felt satisfied watching him eat, pleased that she could contribute something useful to this household right from the start. After breakfast, Owen showed her around the property in the morning light. The barn housed 6 horses, including the 2 that had pulled the wagon yesterday. The chicken coop had about 20 hens and that aggressive rooster who thought he owned the place. The milk cow was named Bessie and had a sweet temperament despite her intimidating size. The vegetable garden, as Owen had warned, was looking rather scraggly, with only a few hardy plants clinging to life. "I can work on the garden," Willa offered. "I helped my mother with ours in Boston. I know at least the basics." "That would be helpful," Owen said. "I have been trying, but I do not have the touch for it. If you can get vegetables growing consistently, it would save money and improve our meals considerably." Thomas, the ranch foreman, came over from the bunkhouse to be introduced properly. He was a man in his late 40s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, and he greeted Willa with genuine warmth. "Good to have a woman on the place again," he said. "Owen's been living like a bachelor too long. Gets rough around the edges when there is no civilizing influence." "I am not sure how civilizing I will be," Willa said with a smile, "but I will do my best." Over the following weeks, Willa slowly found her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She took over all the cooking and most of the household chores, freeing Owen and Thomas to focus on the more physically demanding work with the cattle and horses. She attacked the vegetable garden with determination, clearing out the dead plants, amending the soil, and planting seeds she ordered from the catalog at the general store. She learned to milk Bessie, gather eggs without getting pecked by the aggressive rooster, and bake bread in the temperamental cookstove. The work was hard and the days were long, but there was a satisfaction in it that Willa had not expected. In Boston, her life had been about appearances and propriety, about maintaining social standing and keeping up the pretense that her father's debts did not exist. Here, the work was concrete and real. When she made bread, people ate it. When she planted seeds, vegetables grew. When she mended a shirt, it got worn. Everything she did had immediate, visible results. Owen was a good partner in these early days of their marriage, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded at something new. He taught her about the ranch operations, explaining the cycle of breeding and calving, the best grazing areas for different seasons, the challenges of water management in this dry climate. He never made her feel stupid for not knowing things, and he answered her endless questions with thoughtful detail. They fell into an easy companionship, working side by side during the day and sitting together in the evenings, reading or mending or simply talking. Owen had a small collection of books, mostly practical volumes about ranching and farming, but also a few novels and a volume of poetry that surprised Willa with its worn condition. "My mother's," Owen explained when he caught her looking at it. "She loved poetry. She used to read it aloud to my brother and me when we were children. I brought it with me when I left Kansas, even though it is not very practical. Could not bear to leave it behind." "That is not impractical," Willa said. "That is remembering where you came from." She began reading the poetry aloud in the evenings, the same way Owen's mother must have done. At first she felt self-conscious about it, but Owen seemed to genuinely enjoy it, often closing his eyes and listening with a slight smile on his face. It became their ritual, this quiet time at the end of long days, and Willa found herself looking forward to it. As September turned into October and the aspens on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold, Willa realized that something had shifted between her and Owen. She no longer thought of him as a stranger, or even as the man she had married out of desperation. He was becoming someone familiar and dear, someone whose moods she could read, whose dry humor she appreciated, whose presence she actively sought out during the day. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy strength of his body, the competence with which he handled every task. She noticed small things about him: the way his hair fell across his forehead when he forgot his hat, the little scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She found herself wanting to touch him, casually and companionably at first, but then with a different kind of awareness. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Willa set aside the book she had been reading and looked at Owen directly. He was mending a bridle, his long fingers working the leather with practiced ease. "Owen," she said, and something in her voice made him look up. "I want you to know that I am ready for this to be a real marriage, if you still want that." Owen set down the bridle slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am sure," Willa said, and she was. "You have been kind and patient and respectful, and I appreciate that more than I can say. But we have been married for nearly 2 months now, and I want to be your wife in all ways. Care about you, Owen. This has become more than just a practical arrangement for me." Owen crossed the distance between them and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "It has become more than that for me too," he admitted. "I did not expect to feel this way about you so quickly. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman I married out of necessity and became the woman I look for first thing every morning and think about last thing every night. That is how I feel about you," Willa whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. "I think I am falling in love with you, Owen Crawford." "I know I am falling in love with you, Willa Crawford," Owen replied, and then he kissed her, properly this time, Not the chaste peck they had exchanged at their wedding, but a real kiss full of warmth and promise and barely restrained desire. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed with me," he said quietly. "Let me show you how much you mean to me." Willa stood and took his hand, letting him lead her to the bedroom. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward, as these things often are between people who are still learning each other's bodies. But it was also beautiful, and when Willa fell asleep hours later in Owen's arms, she felt more at home than she had since leaving Boston. The winter that followed was hard, as Owen had warned her it would be. The temperatures dropped brutally, and snow piled high around the cabin. There were days when the wind was so fierce that going outside for even basic chores was a challenge. The isolation intensified, with trips to town becoming impossible for weeks at a time. But inside the cabin, Willa found a warmth and contentment she had never known before. She and Owen grew closer through the long winter months, their relationship deepening into something solid and unshakable. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, opinions on everything under the sun. They made love frequently and with increasing confidence, learning what pleased each other, growing comfortable in their intimacy. Owen was an attentive and generous lover, always making sure Willa was satisfied before seeking his own pleasure. He seemed endlessly fascinated by her body, by the way she responded to his touch, and he took genuine delight in bringing her to peaks of sensation she had not known were possible. In turn, Willa discovered that she enjoyed the physicality of their relationship, the way desire built between them throughout the day, and was finally released in the privacy of their bed. By the time the snow began to melt in late March of 1885, Willa was fairly certain she was pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she was experiencing waves of nausea in the mornings that had nothing to do with anything she had eaten. She waited until she was absolutely sure before telling Owen, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. When she finally told him one evening in early April, Owen's face lit up with such pure joy that Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you pleased?" Willa asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased does not begin to cover it," Owen said. "I am thrilled, amazed, terrified. How are you feeling? Are you sick? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down?" Willa laughed at his sudden anxious hovering. "I am fine. A bit queasy in the mornings, but nothing terrible. Dr. Morrison says it is all perfectly normal. The baby should come in late October or early November." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I love you so much, Willa. Thank you for coming here, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." "I love you too," Willa said, her arms tight around his waist. "So much that sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that I get to have you and this place and now a baby. It is more than I ever dreamed of when I got on that train in Boston." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Willa continued to work hard around the ranch, though Owen and Thomas both conspired to take over her heavier chores as her belly grew. She tended her flourishing garden, cooked and cleaned and sewed tiny clothes for the baby, and glowed with health and happiness. In late October, as the aspens turned gold again and the air took on an autumn chill, Willa's labor began. Martha came out from town to assist, along with Dr. Morrison, and after 12 hours of hard work, Willa gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Owen's dark hair and a lusty cry that could probably be heard all the way to Monticello. They named him Henry, after the young man who had helped carry Willa's trunk on that first overwhelming day in Utah. Owen held his son with such tenderness and awe that Willa fell in love with him all over again, watching the strong, capable man reduced to wonder by the tiny person in his arms. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Willa said, exhausted but radiant. "Look what we made, Owen. Look what we built together." The years that followed were full and rich, though not without their challenges. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under Owen's careful management, the herd increasing year by year. Willa's garden became legendary in the area, producing abundant vegetables that they sold in town for extra income. They added onto the cabin, building a proper bedroom for Henry and later for his siblings. 2 years after Henry, Willa gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah, who were as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. Emma was bold and fearless, always climbing things she should not climb and getting into mischief. Sarah was thoughtful and quiet, preferring to sit with books or help her mother in the kitchen. 3 years after the twins came another boy, James, who inherited Owen's calm temperament and gift with animals. Even as a toddler, he could gentle the most skittish horse with his patient presence. The cabin that had once seemed spacious for two now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Willa sometimes looked around at the noise and mess and felt overwhelmed, but then Owen would catch her eye across the room and smile, and she would remember that first day in Monticello when her body had shaken apart from fear and exhaustion, when Owen had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and told her to breathe. She had breathed. She had survived. And somehow, impossibly, that terrifying leap into the unknown had become this beautiful life. On a crisp autumn evening in 1892, 8 years after their wedding, Willa and Owen sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The children were finally asleep after a long day of harvest work, and the ranch was quiet except for the eternal sound of the creek and the occasional low of cattle. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly, his hand finding hers on the bench between them. "Leaving Boston, coming here, marrying me?" Willa turned to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. His face was more weathered now than it had been 8 years ago, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and working outdoors in all weather. But those whiskey-colored eyes still held the same steadiness, the same quiet strength that had kept her from flying apart on that first terrible day. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. I was so afraid when I arrived here, Owen. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But you caught me when I fell, literally and figuratively. You gave me time to find my footing, and you helped me become someone I am proud to be. This life we have built together, this family, this home, it is everything I never knew I wanted." Owen raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You saved me too, you know. I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here. This ranch felt like work before you came. Now it feels like a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the cabin, one of the children cried out in their sleep, and Willa started to rise, but Owen squeezed her hand. "I will go," he said. "You have been on your feet all day. Rest." Willa settled back onto the bench, listening to Owen's footsteps cross the porch and enter the cabin. Through the window she could see him bending over one of the beds, probably tucking a blanket more securely around a small body. He emerged a moment later and returned to her side. "Emma had kicked off her covers again," he reported. "That child runs hot." "She gets that from you," Willa said with a smile. "You are always throwing off blankets in the night." "And you are always cold," Owen countered. "Always stealing my warmth." "You offer it freely enough," Willa pointed out. "Because I love you," Owen said simply. "Because keeping you warm is one of my favorite things to do." Willa leaned her head against his shoulder, and Owen put his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars whirl slowly across the vast Utah sky, neither of them needing to speak because everything important had already been said. As the years continued to pass, the Crawford Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Owen's careful breeding program produced cattle that were sought after by buyers from as far away as Denver, and his reputation for honest dealing made him a respected figure in the ranching community. Willa became known for her garden, her cooking, and her quiet competence in managing the household and helping with the books. Together they were a formidable team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through difficulties. The children grew strong and capable, each finding their own place on the ranch. Henry showed an early aptitude for the business side of ranching, keeping careful records and understanding market trends even as a young teenager. The twins developed into skilled horsewomen who could ride as well as any of the hired hands. James, as expected, became the family's animal expert, with a particular gift for training horses. There were hard times too, of course. A drought year when they lost a quarter of their herd. A winter so brutal that they feared they would not make it through. The death of Thomas, the faithful foreman who had become like family to them. A fever that swept through the territory and nearly took Emma. But they weathered each crisis together, Owen and Willa facing every challenge as partners, their bond growing stronger with each trial overcome. On their 20th wedding anniversary in October of 1904, their children surprised them with a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over the county to celebrate, filling the expanded cabin and spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing and more food than even this crowd could eat. Martha, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, made the long trip from Monticello to be there. "I knew you two would make it," she told Willa, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "That first day when you came off the stage shaking like a leaf, I was not sure. But then I saw how Owen looked at you, even when you were falling apart. He saw you, really saw you, and he was not afraid of your fear. That is when I knew. I will always be grateful that you took me in that day," Willa said, embracing the older woman carefully. "You were so kind when I needed kindness desperately." "You just needed someone to help you catch your breath," Martha said, "and a blanket and some warm tea. The rest you did yourself, dear. You built this beautiful life." As the sun set on the anniversary celebration and the guests began to depart, Willa found Owen standing at the edge of the yard looking out toward the creek and the mountains beyond. She slipped her hand into his, and he smiled down at her. 20 years, he said. "It has gone so fast. And so slow," Willa countered. "I feel like I have known you forever, but also like we just got started." "I know what you mean," Owen said. "There is still so much I want to do with you. Places I want to take you, things I want to show you. Another 20 years might not be enough. Then we will just have to make every moment count," Willa said. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the land they had worked and loved, the home they had built, the family they had raised. From the porch came the sound of their children's laughter as Henry told some story that had Emma and Sarah in stitches, while James listened with his characteristic quiet smile. "I never thanked you properly," Willa said suddenly, looking up at Owen. "For that first day, for catching me when I fell, for wrapping that blanket around me, for telling me to breathe. You could have been frustrated or impatient with me. Instead, you were exactly what I needed. You were shaking so hard," Owen remembered, his voice soft, "and you looked so lost and afraid. All I could think was that I needed to help you feel safe. That whatever else happened, I needed you to know you were safe." "I did feel safe," Willa said. "Even in the middle of the panic, some part of me knew I was safe because you were there. You have made me feel safe every day since then. That is the greatest gift you have ever given me." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the stars began to emerge overhead. "The greatest gift you gave me was taking a chance on this life," he murmured against her hair. Getting on that train, coming to Utah, marrying me even though you were terrified. You were so brave, Willa. Braver than you ever gave yourself credit for. We were both brave, Willa said. It takes courage to open your heart to someone, to build something together from nothing. We did that, Owen. We are still doing it. As the years turned into decades, Owen and Willa grew old together on their ranch in Utah. They watched their children grow up and marry and have children of their own. Henry took over the daily management of the ranch when Owen's knees finally gave out, running it with the same careful attention his father had taught him. The twins both married local ranchers and stayed in the area, their children growing up riding horses across the same land their mother had. James became a sought-after horse trainer, working with ranches throughout the territory. The cabin that had once been Owen's bachelor quarters became a gathering place for 3 generations, filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of family gatherings. The garden that Willa had rescued from neglect became a teaching ground where she showed her daughters and granddaughters how to coax vegetables from the difficult soil. Owen and Willa's love story became something of a legend in Monticello. The tale of the mail-order bride who arrived in shock and the cowboy who wrapped her in a blanket and told her to breathe. Young couples getting married would seek them out for advice, wanting to know the secret of their enduring partnership. And Willa would always say the same thing. There was no secret, only the daily choice to show up for each other, to be kind, to be patient, to weather the storms together. On a crisp autumn morning in 1924, exactly 40 years after Willa had first arrived in Monticello, she and Owen sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunrise. They were both in their 80s now, moving slowly but still sharp-minded and deeply in love. Owen's hair was white and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were still that same warm whiskey brown that Willa had fallen in love with decades ago. 40 years, Willa said softly. Can you believe it has been 40 years? Feels like yesterday and forever, all at the same time, Owen said, echoing the sentiment they had shared on their 20th anniversary. If you could go back, Willa asked, and tell that young man waiting for his mail-order bride what was coming, what would you say? Owen considered the question carefully. I would tell him that she is going to arrive scared and shaking and completely overwhelmed, that she is going to need patience and kindness and time to find her feet. But I would also tell him that she is the strongest person he will ever meet, even if she does not know it yet. That she is going to transform his empty house into a home and his lonely life into something full and rich and beautiful. And I would tell him to wrap her in a blanket and tell her to breathe, because sometimes that is all anyone needs to know, they are safe, and that someone is there to help them through the hard moments. Tears slipped down Willa's wrinkled cheeks. And if I could go back to that terrified girl stepping off the stagecoach, I would tell her that the man waiting for her is going to catch her when she falls, that he is going to be patient and kind and true, that he is going to build a life with her that is better than anything she could have imagined. And I would tell her that even though she is shaking and cannot breathe and thinks she has made a terrible mistake, she is actually at the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. She just needs to breathe through the fear and trust that she is going to be all right. Owen took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 4 decades of practice. We were both lucky, he said. Lucky that Martha knew where to put you. Lucky that Doc Morrison knew what was wrong. Lucky that we both decided to take a chance on each other. It was not just luck, Willa countered gently. It was choice. Every single day we chose each other. We chose kindness over anger, patience over frustration, love over convenience. That is what built this life, Owen. Not luck. Choice. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, warming their old bones. From inside the cabin came the sound of their great-granddaughter practicing scales on the piano that Willa had brought from Boston so many years ago. The notes drifted out through the open window, mixing with the eternal sound of the creek and the birdsong in the cottonwood trees. I would do it all again, Owen said suddenly. Every hardship, every struggle, every difficult moment. I would do it all again in a heartbeat if it meant getting to build this life with you. So would I, Willa said, squeezing his hand. So would I. And as they sat together on the porch of the cabin, they had expanded and improved and filled with love over 4 decades, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had raised. Willa thought back to that terrified girl who had stumbled off the stagecoach shaking and unable to breathe. She wished she could tell that girl that everything was going to be all right, better than all right, that the man with the steady hands and calm voice was going to become her everything, that the blank canvas of the western frontier was going to become home in ways she never imagined possible. She wished she could tell that girl that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep breathing through the fear, keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep showing up for the life you have chosen even when it terrifies you. Because on the other side of that fear is something beautiful and precious and worth every moment of struggle it took to build it. Owen and Willa lived out their final years together in the home they had created, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the legacy of their love written in the faces and lives of the family they had built. When Owen passed quietly in his sleep in the winter of 1926, Willa held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. She followed him into rest just 3 months later, unable to imagine a life without her partner, her love, her home. They were buried together on a gentle rise overlooking the ranch, under the vast Utah sky that had witnessed their entire life together. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription chosen by their children. He caught her when she fell. She taught him how to love. Together they built a life worth living. And in the cabin below, where new generations of Crawfords continued to live and work and love, the story of the mail-order bride who could not stop shaking and the cowboy who wrapped her in a blanket and told her to breathe became part of family legend, passed down through the years as a reminder that the greatest love stories often begin with fear transformed by kindness, and that sometimes all anyone needs is someone to help them catch their breath and believe that everything is going to be all right.